Welcome back, everybody, to the Writer's Parachute, where we are guiding writer and author dreams to a perfect landing. Today, we have a very special guest. I am so excited to interview him. It is Jerry Mikorenda, and you can see his two books back over my shoulder here. He is an author, historian, speechwriter, and observer of human nature. I read part of one book and skimmed the other one, and I am very, very impressed. So I really want to get into this interview and talk to Jerry. But of course, as always, you guys know we got to do some housekeeping up front. As always, we would like you to hit that subscribe button, smash the like button, go ahead and share this video. And if you're on one of the podcasting channels, please leave us a review. We would love to hear from you. Also, we would like for you to follow the Writer's Parachute on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and now on TikTok at Writer Parachute. That is Writer Parachute with no S. So go take care of that. And of course, we always start with a topic of the day. So today, Jerry suggested this. So thank you, Jerry. So we're going to talk about how do you know when what you're writing as a manuscript is done? When are you ready to move forward and maybe hire that illustrator, maybe hire that editor, that proofreader, that beta reader? Well, there are a lot of answers to that question. And what I would say is think about the process. So generally, if you're writing something, if you're creating it, I want you to think about none of the rules. I want you to think of the spaghetti method. Throw it all at the wall, see what sticks. Then you clean it up in the second and the third draft with the rewrites and the revisions and make it all work and make it shiny and pretty. At this point, you probably want to talk to a few trusted beta readers to take a look at it to see if your plot and story and all of the information you are giving in the manuscript is working. At that point, once you've reached that, maybe go through one more time for edits, rewrites, revisions, and then maybe send it off to an editor. If you're off to the editor, this would be a perfect time to bring in your illustrator or someone that is graphic artist to do maybe your book cover, do any kind of graphs or drawings that you want to add to the book. Also a great time to work on your author bio, work on the synopsis or the blurb or the back cover copy, whichever one you want to call it. And think about how you're going to publish your book. So thinking about how you're going to publish your book is as important as any of the other steps. Now, of course, if you're going to go with traditionally publishing, then after the editor, you're probably not going to want to do the book cover. You're probably not going to want to do the back cover copy. That will be done with conjunction with your publisher, and also illustrations often are done that way unless you are an author illustrator. So think about that. Think about the steps. Think about what it is you're wanting to achieve with each step. We start out, we're just trying to tell the story. Then we try to make it better. We try to make it tight and clean. Then we talk to others to make sure it's working, tighten it up a little bit more, and then bring in some professional advice. So I hope that's helpful for you guys today. And of course, we're going to move right along and get to this interview with Jerry Mikorenda. Jerry's work has appeared in the New York Times, the Boston Herald, the Gotham Center History Blog, and the 2010 Encyclopedia of New York City. His biography, America's First Freedom Writer, Elizabeth Jennings, Chester A. Author, and the Early Fight for Civil Rights, was published in 2020. His short stories have appeared in the San Francisco Chronicle, the Bull, Cowboy Jamboree, and Gravel magazine, as well as other journals. His historical middle grade novel, The Whaler's Daughter, was published by Regal House in 2021. We are so excited to have you today, Jerry. How are you? Welcome to the Writer's Parachute.
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, we're so glad to have you here. And as I said, I have been so excited for this interview for weeks. So I was so glad when I got the books, and unfortunately just life kind of happens and I haven't had a time to read through the whole thing. But what I have read, I'm very impressed. And I have to finish this first book of yours, America's First Freedom Rider. I am glued to my seat reading this, which kind of surprised me because it's more history and a lot of history, but I was extraordinarily impressed while I was reading it. So when did you start writing and why history?
Well, that's interesting. I guess I started writing. I can remember, I can remember writing a play in the 5th grade and having it produced. But I think maybe everybody in the class had their play produced, so I'm not going to say it was anything great. But it was a pirate play, and I was really like, "Wow, this is fun." Mm-hmm. And I did some writing in high school, and I had a teacher who really took me and said, "You got some talent, but you should really be working on it." And I went into college thinking, "Well, maybe that's something I can do for a living," having no idea about it, and took a number of creative writing classes and got involved in school newspapers. And when I graduated, I worked for my local town newspaper out in Port Jefferson, New York. It was, a little village newspaper that had been around almost since the 1930s. And so got kind of enamored with what was going on about small town life and what it's like to live there. And you see all different characters, kind of a, George Willard thing. If you think of the book, geez, I can't even remember the name of it now. But anyway, where he finally leaves the town, but he learns a lot about life in the small towns. And I wrote stories about veterans and people who were living on the streets and old World War I guys and stuff like that. So. Really started to get a flavor for another side of American life that you don't really see when you're stuck in a college classroom. And I was always a history buff. I remember being a little kid watching a program. I don't know if you're old enough to remember this, Profiles in Courage.
Oh, which was I'm going to age myself right here. Yes, I do remember it.
Yeah, and I think it was based on Kennedy's book, and I just loved all that. I like history, and I always did well in what they called social studies classes. So it's just one of those, if there was a chance to go on a trip to a Revolutionary War house or battlefield somewhere locally, I always did it, still do. And so I enjoyed it. And then as I got older and I started to see opportunities to write, it was just the perfect match, both nonfiction and fiction wise.
Well, we're so thrilled that you did, and I am going to tell you, if you don't have a copy of either one of his books, this America's First Freedom Fighters or The Whaler's Daughter, I am encouraging you to go pick up one or both of them because they are great. We will have the links to both books in the show notes, also links to Jerry. So you're writing in multiple genres here. You're writing in this historical biography and what we would term as maybe a slice between middle grade and YA. So how do you choose which one to work on? I mean, that seems like they would not flow together.
Well, I would say sometimes the material chooses you, and that's pretty much what happened with this book. And like a lot of the things that I've written, I'm researching one thing, but I'm learning about another. Mm-hmm. And so I was actually working on research for a picture book about trolley cars of all things, because I think my main character was going to be in a trolley car. And all of a sudden this note pops up that this woman, Elizabeth Jennings, desegregated New York City's transit system 100 years before Rosa Parks was even born or whatever. And I'm like, what? I thought I knew everything. I said, this is like, I gotta just find out more about this. So again, historical curiosity led me to, look on further. And as the hopes for the picture book faded, I started saying, well, this is really interesting. And I distinctly remember telling my wife, it was I think it was actually President's Day of all things in 2008, and we had a blizzard here, and I said I'm gonna start investigating this, and when I hit the dead end, I'll stop, and that'll be that. Well, I never hit the dead end, and the result is the book. So that's how I got it, and I think really, the value I added to the story, I think, is all the learning and writing the stories and having an idea, or I guess we call it maybe a fictional idea of how a story is told, is the way I tried to tell the nonfiction story without putting any fiction into it. And actually making the story. So the main thing in her story is there's this event where she gets thrown off this horse car, and that's the main thing. And I think,
well, I'm gonna stop you right there. We're gonna get to that in a minute. So right. I want to get to just a few more things. So don't jump here a little bit, because I really want to talk about this book, because it is a page turner for a history book. It surprised me how involved and how much I wanted to keep turning those pages. So you have a quote on your LinkedIn account that says, "I uncover the lives of unheralded heroes and marginalized historical figures, lend a voice to the unheard, and breathe life into the past." So your book, America's First Freedom Fighter, is based on the true events about Elizabeth Jennings and Chester Author. So you already told us what inspired you to write it. So can you start us off with what is so interesting about these two characters? And you sort of let it slip there that Elizabeth Jennings did kind of start that desegregation 100 years before Rosa Parks, which shocked me, because I did not ever know that. I had never heard that.
Yeah, few people do know about it, more than they used to now. But it's like I said, one of those unknown facts. And again, when you research whether I think it's a novel or nonfiction, you look at, the people, your characters, or the people who you're writing about, and you say, right, where is their story? And the story I saw in the contrast of the two, which is, Elizabeth grows up in New York City, I would say upper middle class, well-educated, in the school system. Chester Author, I think.
Okay. I'm just going to add something in here for our listening audience that don't know. Elizabeth Jennings is a free Black woman. So she was born a free Black woman in New York City. So continue.
Okay. So yeah, and then on the other hand, you have Chester Author, who maybe, between him and Lincoln, who was the poorest person to ever become president. I mean, they lived a really hard life up in Vermont. But Author, because he's male and white, is able to rise to the highest level office, and Elizabeth has to fight for every single little right that she has her entire life. So what I did with the book is almost like a DNA, kind of twisted them together so you could see how this happens, how Author's able to get into different colleges. He moves up in life, and Elizabeth, even when she graduates from when they started certifying teachers in 1857, she is one of the top people grade-wise amongst all the teachers who get this degree, but yet she was not allowed to graduate with the rest of the class, because her and another woman, they were considered Black colored, as they called them at the time. And so they were kept out of their graduation, and nobody knows that they graduated and how well they did. But yet she kept going on her whole life. And so I think that's really the anchor of the book, and I think really shows how racism gets into things, and not only that, how racism, because this is the 1850s, how the racism developed. And again, it all goes back to obviously slavery and how slavery developed in this country. And I spend a lot of time talking about that in the book as well.
Which I found extraordinarily interesting, that you go all the way back, I believe, into the 1600s, where you're talking about, how slavery was handled before the 1800s, in the mid 1800s, and then how it changed with some of the prominent members of New York who presented themselves as being, abolitionists, that they did not want, or they did not approve of slavery, but their dollars spoke louder in the fact that they were investing in that trade. So I thought that was extraordinarily interesting, that it was so much tied to profits and trade and investments. It was just very interesting how it was all wrapped around money, and I had not ever heard that kind of a tale of why that was done the way it was done. So that was extraordinarily interesting to me. So at the end of the book, you also mentioned that there are several other forgotten historical figures. Can you kind of give us just a brief history about why? I mean, I understand why you're comparing the two together, and I understand why they are significant individually, but why did you feel like they had to be the two that you're using in comparison and contrast through this story?
Why I used Elizabeth and Arthur? I think because there was just such contrast, and also with Elizabeth, a lot of times when people write books, or if you want to call it a biography, it's like they just focus on that one person.
Mhm.
And with her, because there isn't a lot known about her and there isn't a lot of information out there, I looked at her and I said, this is really not just about her, it's about her family. Because number one, her father, who was one of these unknown folks you're mentioning, he is the first African-American to receive a US patent. In 1821, he invented dry cleaning. They called it dry scouring back then. And so he makes a lot of money on royalties and what have you. And he takes that money and he funnels it toward, abolitionist movements. He's an ardent abolitionist, as are her older brothers. Elizabeth's the youngest in the family. Her two older brothers become very colleagues of Frederick Douglass up in Boston, and they're up there working on things, as well as her mother, who gets involved in these literary societies where, when women weren't really allowed to, partake in public life, they did things in the background in these literary societies, and they also worked for anti-slavery movements. So the whole family was involved in this, and I saw it really as a book about the family, not just about her. And the whole abolitionist movement, which in New York is really forgotten. When you're asked about it, everybody says, and as I thought, oh, Boston, that's where it all happened, right? Well, no, actually, a lot of it happened in New York. The first African-American newspaper in the country, Freedom's Journal, starts in New York. And there's a chapter in a book I called The Bold Men of Color, who are all really the founders and the ones who were against the anti-colonization movement, which basically said, we want to take all the African Americans in the US, and you guys get to go to Liberia, and you have your own country, and then we'll have our country. And these guys all said, no way, this is our country, we were born here, we'll stay here. And they fought it tooth and nail, and thank God they did, and so those are the forgotten guys, like the Reverend Pennington, who is a runaway, I believe he's an escaped slave, becomes a blacksmith in New York. He ends up going to Heidelberg and graduating from Yale. And he does it in Yale, where none of his classmates would ever speak to him because they didn't want to, they didn't think he belonged there. And he goes on and becomes a reverend, and he eventually sues and tries to win a case similar to Elizabeth's. Unfortunately, he loses. So those are the people that I'm talking about, the ones who've done a lot of things, but history books just overlook them because they're not the main people. They're not the ones. Particularly, there are no one thing that I found. There's only one photograph of Elizabeth. There's none of her family. So people tend to, well, if we have no photos, we keep talking about them, which I think is absurd. But
right. Well, I mean, am I remembering correctly? But wasn't one of Elizabeth's brothers? Didn't he become one of the first Black men?
Black what?
Dentist.
Yes, he was one of the first. He studied with a dentist up in Boston, and he became a dentist. And later, he was a vestryman down in New Orleans.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then I think one of her other brothers became a lawyer. Is that correct?
I don't think he was a lawyer. William was, he was a businessman, and both of the brothers go up to Boston, and I think armed with their father's, dry cleaning methods and not having to pay the royalties, I guess, to that. I'll assume that. They open a cleaning a business of their own, a clothing business, and then that gets vandalized, and they go into like curiosity shops. So one thing her family was good at, they were very good business people. They were the ones who, when you had an organization, they were the secretaries and the people who made things go. So you can have, charismatic leaders who make speeches, but the people who make the organizations run are the ones who really, they're the anchors. They're like, if you're playing football, they're the linemen who make the team really work. And that's what her family did all their lives, including her. They always got involved in things, and they were always the administrators who took failing things and turned them around.
Wow. It is an amazing story. I have just been, as I said, I've been glued to the pages. So now we want to shift gears a little bit, and we want to talk about the middle grade YA book, The Whaler's Daughter. It's set in 1910. So how did you take something that, and this is actual history that you've kind of fictionalized and put this story around this young girl, which is pretty fantastic. As I said, I've only been able to skim it. So I want to know how this book came about, because I am so impressed that you take these very obscure ideas and write these beautiful books.
No, well, thank you. There's a little different tact with this one. Back in 2009, PBS had a special called The Killers of Eden. I think they still show it. And it talked about how the local Aboriginal tribes there used the orcas, killer whales, to help them hunt whales. And this went on for thousands of years. And then when the Australian whalers, or people who come to the English come to Australia and they start whaling with this one family, the local Aboriginal folks become whalers with this one group. And there's this one killer whale, this orca they called Old Tom, who would always come and call the whalers to come to go for a hunt. And it was just amazing. I just thought this can't be true, but it was true. So as time went on, I started thinking, this is like aching to have a story told about it, but what's the story? What can I do? And I thought, and I said, well, if it's just about whalers doing through this, there's a lot of nonfiction stories that really tell that story already. So that's nothing new. But I said, well, what if there was a daughter who wanted to be a whaler? That's kind of interesting. And what if she's not allowed to and she's really pissed off about it? And so I had, so the story started to build, and I was really careful when I was researching Australia. I didn't want to just pull something out of the air and say, oh, well, this happened. Like, for instance, I hope I'm not going to ruin the book for you, but there is a comet appears at one point. And I made sure that actually in 1910, there was a comet. There was Halley's Comet, but there was also another comet. And the other comet, they get mixed up. And I think in some ways, the other comet, I don't even remember the name of it now, was the stronger of the two, the one people really saw, but they thought it was Halley's. So I kind of tried to bring that in. And like I said, anything I did in the book was sort of based on fact, so I could anchor it to something, and it's just not fantasy, I guess.
Well, you did a great job. And as I said, I've only been able to skim it, but again, guarantee once I finish the first book, I'm going straight to that one because I was very impressed, and I kind of wanted to go, well, maybe I should read this one instead. So I'll be reading that one soon. So beyond these two great books, the first America's First Freedom Fighter and The Whaler's Daughter, you have extensive short stories, and some of them have been published, as I read in your bio, in some pretty impressive magazines and journals. So I wonder if you could help our audience just a little bit and tell them how easy was that process and any advice that you would want to give them about submitting to periodicals.
Yeah. Well, submitting to periodicals, it's kind of like job hunting. You got to figure out, all right, what's your match? Here are your skills, or here's what you're writing about, who out there publishes that kind of stuff. And sometimes it's not that easy to tell, particularly when you get with the real literary type ones. So I think, you have to send out, I believe, they say you should send out one and wait for it to come back. But realistically, I mean, I've sent stuff out years ago that they don't even return it to you. So I think you have to send out to multiple. And I think most magazines realize that happens now. And, you're going to get a lot of rejections, even when you have a really good story that eventually does get published, you get a lot of rejections on it. So in a lot of ways, it's kind of funny. A lot of ways, it's good to be able to withstand that, to be able to sit there and get a rejection for your work, but then say, all right, what am I going to do now? Am I going to sulk in a corner and say I'm no good, or am I going to say, all right, what points is there something I need here, or do I just need to just keep finding the right audience and the right publication? So I think that's what it comes down. And I always looked at short stories as more of a way to experiment and try things out versus like, oh, well, I'm going to try to write this story, I need to be in this publication. I look at it like, experiment with the stories, see what kind of reactions you get, and then you can use it in the bigger projects with the novels and what have you. So I like to think that a lot of my stories are somewhat experimental in nature.
Well, they're very well written, and I think that's great advice for anybody, even if you're shopping for an agent or a publisher. Is you're going to run into a lot of rejection. They're going to ask you for rewrites and revisions and stuff like that. And it does need to be a topic and brand match for them. I mean, obviously you would not send, a short story about, something from America's First Freedom Rider to a kid lit magazine. That just would not
Right.
be a brand match. But, there are many other magazines, periodicals, and journals out there that do want articles about history. And I think, again, great job. Do your homework, people.
Yeah.
It's like, that I think that people wonder why for years and years teachers gave homework. Well, now you know.
Yeah.
So you would know how to do homework because you're constantly doing it as an adult. So
Yeah. And the good thing now is everything is online. So
yeah.
it's much easier to find stuff. I mean, in the good old days, you had to actually try to get a hold of a literary magazine from a bookstore or try to get it from the library. Now it's much easier to go online and see what it is that they take, and they're much more open to about, hey, we want stories that are this long. This is what we're looking for. So I think that's very helpful.
Yeah, I remember doing. I don't know if you remember working in the library archives where we had to go through the fish film to look for back articles on periodicals and magazines, because they only kept usually the first 3 or 4 months, and then they would put them on film. So it's like if you were looking for back articles, you had to go through just
Oh yeah, the old microfiche. Yes,
piles and piles.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, I'm so glad to have Google. So, all right. So I want to ask you what we always ask the people here on the Writer's Parachute. So all authors and writers experience some kind of obstacle or stumbling blocks. Now, I'm not saying that you did, but I'm sure that you probably did eventually or when you started out. So what were the biggest lessons that you learned in publishing and writing your books, and what did you learn from
Wow, that's a really big question there. Um, yeah, I think ultimately the biggest thing I learned, and I don't think I'm unusual in saying this, is learning to listen to myself versus what everybody else was telling me. And that doesn't mean I got bad advice and that, a lot of the comments and things that I got weren't valid, but ultimately, you got to be the kind of writer that you want, not what other people do. And, a lot of times people are sincerely giving you what they think is really good advice,
them?
but it might not match who you are, and I found that because, I went to one writers conference and sat down. I had a conference, and the guy says to me, this is really funny stuff. This is this. And I'm thinking, oh, wow, I'm going to get a pat on the back. And he says, you can't be funny. Nobody's going to pay attention to you. This is, literary stuff. You can't be this funny. And I was like, oh, man, that sucks. What am I going to, this is just who I am. So it kind of got down on writing for a while. And then I started, in the mid O's, I guess you would say, around 2004, 2005, I started reading some of George Saunders stuff, and I'm like, this guy's really funny, and he's literary. Well, I'm gonna just do what I want. I'm not gonna, and started getting some success. Not all, but I mean, there's always failure, and there's no reason to talk about the failures, I guess. But
I think that sometimes it's about what we learn. And I mean,
yeah,
there is two very strong points that I got from just what you were saying. It's like you have to have a strong enough opinion about what you're writing and enough passion behind it so that you can defend it. And as far as, stepping outside of what people would consider the guidelines and rules and stuff like that, as long as you understand the rules, then you can understand why it is and it works to step outside, as you did with reading other authors' work. Is you could see that this person, while they were trying to be helpful, maybe didn't consider that there were other options. And this is what you have to do. You do want to ask for opinions, but you do have to be a strong enough writer to defend your position, because nobody can write the way that you do. It's your voice. You are the one representing that book. And so it has to be coming from you and your point of view. Now, while people can guide you and help mold you, it must be you. And so I think that's excellent take on some of the things that you struggle with, because I think most people are trying to be helpful when they're offering advice. But I find a lot of the times when this sort of thing happens is because they don't understand all the different options available, and they only know one way, or they may not understand why somebody would do it differently. They just expect that, they're all cookie cutter books, which I'm here to tell you there are no real cookie cutter books. Each book is unique, and it should be unique, and it should be the voice of the author. So bravo for sticking to your guns and being funny. I'm enjoying it. It's like, sometimes history can be just a little dry and boring, but I'm very much enjoying your book because it is very lively and it is presented in a way that is easily digestible and interesting. So I would have to say that you've done an excellent job in maybe not listening to some of these more helpful advisors. So
yeah, because I think ultimately, like, you talked about voice, and of course all your different characters have voices. They always need to have their own voice, and you can't, if you're sitting there writing and saying, oh, well, last month I was at that conference with so and so I better write it. Like, if once you start to do that, you're finished, I think, because then it's nobody's voice. It's something that's pounding you in the back of the head instead of something that's flowing out of you. So I think it's really important to, just like you said, be yourself.
Well, and I often deal with authors who have sort of inadvertently had this happen to them, where they really admire another author or multiple authors, and they're trying to replicate but it's not them, and they do run into problems. It's like, I personally think this is one of the big reasons for writer's block is, you can try and emulate someone that you admire, but ultimately it needs to be you. You can emulate a style or a way that they present the information, but it has to be you presenting it.
Mm-hmm.
It's very important. So now we're going to get to some fun questions. So, if you could talk to your younger self now, what advice would you offer?
I'd say don't buy a Blockbuster. Put all your money in Apple. No, I think, besides, on a more serious note, I think, if at a younger age, I would have gotten more, I don't say serious, but perhaps believed in what I was doing more at the time instead. You have to work for a living. Everybody does. It's very rare that you get to just write and make enough money to just write, So, but I think if I would have just, at a younger age, say, hey, what I think really is important, instead of thinking what everybody else is important. And like I said, that fellow I had there,
yeah,
I think I would have, started at a younger age, put it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Go blaze your trail early instead of following behind in everybody else's dust.
Yeah, I took a writing class with David Bradley, who wrote a really great book back in back in I think in 1980, called the Chaney'sville Incident. And he said at the time, it takes you 10 years to become a writer. He says, if you start at 13, maybe by 23, if you start at 23, 33, and so on and so forth. And I think that's a pretty good barometer. It's like a 10-year, if you keep at it seriously, it's a 10-year, apprenticeship, if you will,
Yeah,
before you start to really hit your stride.
Yeah, I think it takes 10 years to kind of develop that craft and that feel for what works and what doesn't work. But then, of course, for people like me, I had to get out of my own way, because then my self-esteem became an issue. It's like I had to get past that. So, but it's and I hear this, and I completely understand it. I just felt for years that it didn't matter what I was writing or how good it was. Nobody wanted to read it. They didn't care what I had to say. But the older you get and the more you enjoy life, you realize that, people do want to hear what you have to say. It may not be a lot of people, but somebody does. Somebody is going to enjoy that. So that's always great. So we're going to switch that the other direction. So what advice would you offer to new or any upcoming authors or writers?
New advice. I would say, that routine is good. A lot of people look at, oh, you're in a routine. It's like going to work and this. But you really need a writing routine. I mean, you can't, as we always say, the books don't write themselves, right? So if you can't, as Stephen King said, get your butt in a chair every day, then it's never going to happen. So you got to really find a way to be disciplined to find that time. And I know it's hard. I mean, I in my writing group, I have a lot of mothers with young children, and it's really hard to get that time. But somehow you got to find how you can get that writing time that you need every day. For me, because I used to work in Manhattan, I would actually get up at 3:30 and write in the basement of where I am now for an hour or two, then go to work. And then I would write on a train both ways. In fact, I wrote most of my novels. The two books here were written on the train.
Well, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. It's like, it doesn't take a multitude of time. What it takes is a dedicated schedule. Now, if that schedule is 10 minutes a day, great. Make the most out of those 10 minutes. Also, use the tools that are available. I mean, it is such an amazing time to be a writer. It's like we have computers. We don't have to do it by typewriter or hand anymore. We have, a computer we carry around in our hand all day long that, that we could keep notes on, we can voice to text, we can record our ideas and thoughts on. Use the tools that are available, because you will find that you have more time than you think.
Yeah.
And to those parents, to those mothers and stuff like that are finding it difficult, you have to think about when you have available time. I do a lot of my best plotting while I'm folding laundry.
Yeah.
So it can be done. You just have to try and think maybe a little bit differently. I don't watch a lot of TV because I'm busy writing, and reading and editing and all sorts of other things. So, TV is a luxury to me that I don't get to enjoy every day, but I'm okay with that, because when I do get to enjoy it, then, it's something unique. So you have to always, anytime you're pursuing a passion, you have to give up something in your life for that.
Yeah. And, it doesn't have to be a lot, because I'll talk to people and say, oh, I only wrote 100 words today. And I said, well, so what's wrong with that? If you can write 100 words a day, what do you have at the end of the week? You have 500 words. You multiply that by how many weeks? By the end of the year, you have a good chunk of writing, but it's a consistency. It's almost like dieting. You can't say, oh, I'm going to not eat today and then I'm going to do this tomorrow.
Well, I tell people
it's little increments that get writing done, not blazing, moments.
Right. And I tell everybody, my first book that I published, I wrote it 10 minutes a night, 10 to 15 minutes every night before I went to bed. Just 10 or 15 minutes every night before I went to bed in 31 days. It's, it's over 32. Well, it was about 45, but then we edited it down to 32. But I was able to do that, to get the first draft done. And I think that's, of course, I'm more old school, where I think that, when you're creating, it's a little easier to do it by, by hand, where you're handwriting, because you don't think too much about, all of the corrections and punctuation and grammar and stuff like that. You're just trying to get the story down, but it is doable. You just have to commit to that amount of time, on a regular basis. It's just, it is just part of the writing craft. It is part of the writing business, and it is a business. And I think it's helpful to remember that it doesn't have to be hours and days, and it doesn't have to be a full-time job. It could be just that short amount of time, as long as you're dedicated to keeping that time every day within reason. I mean, life happens, but get back to it. And just one thing I tell my grandkids this all the time. It's like, the hardest part is to create that habit. It takes 6 weeks to create a habit. It takes 3 days to end it.
It's true.
So just keep that in mind if you're feeling like you're going to skip a few days. So, all right. So where can we get these amazing books?
Well, good thing. I mean, obviously they're both on Amazon. Barnes and Noble, certainly on their websites. They're in some stores, others they're not. A lot of independent bookstores. I mean, I think I've been in enough independent stores where you can, if you ask for it, they'll order it, they'll get it for you if they don't have it in-house. And of course, you can go to my publisher's website for Regal House Publishing, and you can order The Whaler's Daughter from there, and America's First Freedom Rider from Lions Press or Rowan Littlefield.
Okay, awesome. Can they get links to that through your website?
Absolutely.
All right. So, and your website again is, I had it here somewhere. It's is it Mikorenda, I believe?
No, it's my full name, JerryMikorenda.com.
Jerry Mikorenda. Okay, we will have that in the show notes for you.
Which is not easy to spell.
Yes, we will
As
put
many
that in
people have
the
found
show
out.
notes for you. So we'll have the link. You can just click on the link and jump over there. So also you are active on social media. So where can we find you on social media?
I'm on all of the Instagram, Twitter. What else is there?
Facebook.
Facebook. I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn also.
All right, LinkedIn. All right, no TikTok
And,
yet.
No TikTok yet. I'm trying to figure out how to get into that. I don't know if they'd let me on. I think I'm too old to be on TikTok.
No, you're not. I can tell you that I'm on TikTok and I'm having fun figuring it
Yeah.
out. And it's like what I love about social media is they kind of take pity on us old people. So it's like I constantly get comments about you're doing this wrong. And I'm like, oh, thank you. I didn't know how to do it. So now I do know how to do it. So just jump in and try it. Trust me, somebody will tell you.
Yeah, I'll have to do that.
All right. So what's next for Jerry Mikorenda?
Well, I've got a number of things in the fire. I have a couple of things that are with my agent, and right now I'm really optimistic about a picture book collaboration I'm involved in. Can't say much more beyond that, other than it's kind of a sports book. So really hopeful for that, and I'm also kind of intrigued with graphic novels. I'm working on a graphic novel right now, which is totally different kind of almost skill sets.
Oh, wow.
And do I know what I'm doing? No, not really. But that never stopped me before, and I'll figure. I'm sure I'm making the mistakes, but I'll figure it out.
See, that's why you're perfect here for the writer's parachute. My plan is always to just go jump off that cliff and build my parachute on the way down. I will figure it out. So, I mean, that's very interesting because now we're going to talk to you next time when you come back with your next books, and truly a Renaissance author. So is there anything else that you'd like to include?
No, I would just say to other folks who are out there who want to write, just keep doing it and set your own pace. Don't worry about stuff. The only other advice I would say, if you're getting close to finishing that first book, have something else, because once you get something out there, the first question is, what else do you have? And it's good to have something else instead of, oh, now I got to run back and try to write something. So I would say, build up a body of stuff before you really dive in there, because unless you have something that's really timed to right now and and it's very,
right, of the moment.
Now, yeah, of the moment, exactly.
All right. Well, and also for those of you listening, if you check out the show notes, we also have a link to a blog post that he wrote about writing tips. So that should be an interesting read for you guys. And just reminder to the audience, we are going to include all of the links that we discussed here on the Writer's Parachute in the show notes for you. We're going to link you to his website, to his books, to his tips, and some of these articles that he's included in, along with descriptions and all of his social media accounts. So if you'll just hang on for a few minutes, I'm going to go ahead and pull the ripcord on the tip of the day. And we're going to kind of talk a little bit about some of the things that Jerry mentioned. And one of the things that really stuck with me were two things, I guess, not one, two. So one is just really stick with it. Writing is like any other occupation, and it is an occupation, whether it's a passion or hobby, it is an occupation. You really have to stick with it. You have to be willing to fail to succeed. If you are unwilling to take the criticism, to take the helpful advice, to learn the craft, then you're going to have a really hard time, and you're going to hit the second thing that stuck out to me is rejection. Rejection is just a natural process. It's a natural process in life, but it's very glaringly obvious in the writing world. We are often putting our heart and soul and blood on these pages and offering it to the world for their opinion. Now, not everybody has a great or nice opinion, but that's a whole nother conversation. But that often is very hard for authors who tend to be a little more insular, a little more isolated, to take that criticism, especially from people they may know, or even from people that they don't know. And it's kind of a barrage of things. There's criticism from editors, there's from beta readers, alpha readers, from coaches, from people helping you get your book out into the world. Then you have the reviews, and on and on and on, and people reading your book. It is part of the process. Be prepared for rejection, take it well. And what I try to do when I receive negative reviews or people who don't like that, I usually thank them. Thank you. Because what they have done is they've reminded me that my books are not for everyone. I have a very specific audience for my book. And occasionally I'll get somebody that strays out of their lane and grabs my book, and they may not like it. And I have to remember that that is what I write for. I write for a very specific audience. So if you write for a very specific audience, which most of us do, then you have to recall that somebody may stray into your lane that doesn't belong there. But also, I find sometimes my worst critics offer me the best advice on what it is that I'm missing. And then I can decide whether I want to intentionally miss it, or if I want to think about why I'm leaving that out. So think of rejection as a learning experience rather than a personal diatribe about you individually. It is about your work. It is not about you, and it should never be about you. So gird yourself well and be prepared that not everybody is going to be kind or nice, but in general, most people are. So again, back to the point, stick with it. You will be well rewarded in the end. That's all we have for today on the Writer's Parachute. I want to thank my very special guest, Jerry Mikorenda, his book, America's First Freedom Fighter, and his young adult middle grade book, The Whaler's Daughter. I would highly, highly encourage you guys to go get one or both of these books. Thank you for coming on, Jerry. Do you have any last words before we go ahead and close it out?
No, thanks for having me, and good advice for your audience, and just keep on keeping on, people.
All right. Well, till next time, we hope all of your writing dreams land well. Bye.
Take care.